Stephen W. Long. You may know me from The Writing Life, but today I'm here with Maggie Stuckey, and we're going to talk a little bit about NaNoWriMo, I think, but I see that look. Actually, Maggie is going to do a presentation about how to write a nonfiction book proposal, which puts it at odds with NaNoWriMo a little bit.
A little bit.
A little bit. And having said that, I can't think of somebody more qualified to do this presentation. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Well, good. And just for people who don't know you, let's set the scene a little bit, or set the foundation.
Okay.
You've been involved in one way or another, both as a writer and as an editor, in numerous best-selling nonfiction books.
That's correct.
Okay. So you've got the credentials.
Yeah, I did right. Thank
Okay.
you.
With this workshop or presentation, how long have you been doing this sort of thing?
This particular workshop is relatively new, and interestingly enough, it came about at the request of a librarian.
Okay.
Not the folks here, but at another library. Back about a little more than 2 years ago, I offered a workshop built around a book of mine, which is called Soup Night, which is about using soup to bring people together.
Right.
I offered librarians a program. We would actually put on a soup night in the library.
Oh boy.
It was a big success. Everybody loved it. And one of those librarians said, because I talked about, in response to a question, I think, somebody asked me, how is it different writing fiction from nonfiction? So I talked about how the critical, absolutely critical thing with nonfiction is to have a really, really good proposal.
You bet.
So at the end of that presentation, the librarian said, would you be willing to come back and teach us about nonfiction proposals? And I said, sure. So I put together this workshop, which I've now done about a dozen times since, and I'm delighted to be back in McMinnville. I love this library. I love the library staff. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it is. They're terrific.
Yeah.
So, and the presentation now, how long is that?
Well, I generally say it's an hour and a half. And then if people have other questions, which they often do, because a lot of times people come who really need a kind of a basic 101 introduction to how publishing works.
Okay.
So there are a lot of questions which are kind of on the fringes of the scope of this workshop. But they come up, and I say, if you don't mind waiting till the end, I'll be happy to deal with those questions.
Okay.
If I know the answer. I mean, I'm not going to make something up if I don't know, but if I know something about what you're asking about, I'd be happy to tell you what I know.
Sure.
So depending on how many of those we have, it sometimes runs into 2 hours. Okay. We should say about NaNoWriMo, in case there are people watching who don't know.
Right.
It stands for National Novel Writing Month, which is the month of November. It's a national program, as you can imagine from the name, and there are actually formats that people can click into that means they can write a novel in a month. And a lot of people, both beginners and experienced writers, find it a good exercise, a good discipline to try to do that. What we're talking about today is not novels, it's nonfiction.
Right.
Which is why we said it's a little bit interesting, I should say, that I was asked to come and do this proposal as a kickoff to NaNoWriMo. I have to sort of say, wait a second, not talking about novels, we're talking about nonfiction.
It's almost more coincidental than...
And the other thing is, a lot of writers like to do both. So,
of course.
So it is kind of a way to just sort of get everybody in the mode of let's get down to work here.
So you've done this before, you've done it about a dozen times.
Correct.
What are the venues? It's not just libraries.
It's primarily libraries.
Okay.
I set it up that way deliberately. I organized it myself. I got a lot of support from my publisher in terms of handouts and promotional materials and stuff, but I really came up with the idea and shepherded this through on my own. Okay. And my original concept was to deliver a program to libraries in small and medium-sized towns in Oregon and Washington.
Okay.
And it was, my first offering was so well received that a lot of libraries invited me back, which is wonderful. I mean, it's just wonderful to know that they want me to come back. And, you know. And then I didn't make any specific effort to make this happen, but word has kind of spread. So I've been invited to talk at Master Gardener annual, because I also write gardening books.
Right.
So the Master Gardener groups in each county sometimes put on a big festival at springtime gardening fair, in which they bring in speakers. So I've been invited to do several of those. I was, just the other day, I was invited to come to a tea shop in the town of Tillamook.
Okay.
To do a program on tea. So
And Maggie, has that been a topic as well?
I have a book on tea parties. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then it's a natural.
It's a natural. Yeah. Right. So it's one of the things that happens, I guess, when you have a certain amount of exposure in the world at large.
Right.
This person hears me talk about this and is a member of that group, and so they invite me. Right. It kind of spreads like, I'm not going to say virus because it spreads like something nice.
Something nice, yeah.
Yeah, what would that be?
And in this time that we're in, we don't want to say it spreads like a wildfire because we've
No,
had plenty of that.
no.
All right.
It spreads like beautiful flower petals.
I love it. Okay. And now, when somebody attends this, what should an attendee expect? What, do they need to bring anything?
No, they don't need to bring anything. I have a very rich packet of handouts. So what they need to bring is a pencil, because people generally end up taking a lot of notes.
Sure.
And a willingness to engage. I mean, this is heavy stuff. This is not for entertainment. I have a lot of information to deliver. So you got to be ready to sort of sit there and absorb it all and take it all in and make notes of your questions and throw up your hand when I say something that's confusing and all that kind of stuff.
And you said it, but I want to reiterate. In nonfiction, if you're serious about nonfiction, there really, obviously you have to do the work. But when you want to get it out there, there's nothing more important than
The proposal.
the proposal.
It's make or break. It absolutely is. And the reason I wanted to do this workshop is I'm dismayed at the number of people I run into who don't understand that. Mm-hmm. They think what they need to do is write the whole book, and that is the wrong way to go about it. Right. It's absolutely the wrong way.
And am I correct that with nonfiction, once you make the proposal, and if that's accepted, then they sort of shepherd you or say, this is the direction we'd like you to take this?
It often happens, and that's why that the proposal is the fulcrum for everything. Okay. Because it often happens that the editorial staff in the publishing house has their own image right. of what they think would make a successful book. And we need to pay attention to that. I mean, it's foolish not to. So if you give them an outline, a well thought out, well researched, well developed outline, but they see that maybe a certain other element would appeal to a different kind of market, well, that's all to the good, you know. So you want to take in that suggestions and incorporate them in. That's why they don't want you to write the whole thing.
You know, you just said two things really that triggered this thought. You talked about one person telling another. Yeah. And that even though this is garden and this is tea, yeah. you can do both. We are rounded, complicated people. So, and I know in nonfiction, you need to have an expertise or an authority. This is why I need to write this book. But maybe you also know something else, and then they can shepherd that. Yes, we're talking about this. Do you also know a little something about that? And there's a tie-in.
Right.
And Maggie, I know that your area is nonfiction.
Yes.
Sometimes these distinctions are a little vague. So let me ask you about memoir. Okay. You would think that that's nonfiction, but is that really the case? And does the writer then treat it differently?
It is nonfiction in the sense that it's all true. You know, it's not something that you make up. What we're talking about in this workshop is how you attract the attention of a publishing house. Okay. And the process is what is built around the proposal. that whole submission process, in that submission process, I should say, memoirs are treated as if they were fiction.
By the publisher.
Only as regards how you submit it.
Okay.
Because they want to see the whole thing if it's a memoir.
Okay.
Nonfiction books, they don't want to see the whole thing. Novels, they want to see the whole thing. Memoirs, they want to see the whole thing. That's the only distinction.
Okay.
But memoirs are nonfiction in the sense that they represent truth.
Can you comment on creative nonfiction?
Yes.
To me, that's a contradiction in terms, but let's find out.
Another term for it, which means the same thing, is narrative nonfiction, and that's a little easier for people to grasp.
Okay.
Because you use the techniques of narrative writing in telling a nonfiction story. Techniques like dialogue,
Okay.
like character description, like plot development, even structure your book as if it was a big mystery,
Okay.
or description of place. All of those things that make a novel rich can also be applied to nonfiction.
Okay.
And that's when we're talking about narrative nonfiction, generally speaking. Right. And coincidentally, one of the first things I do in this class is I ask people to introduce themselves by first name and give us a one-sentence summary of what their book is about. Because it's been my experience that more often than not, there's somebody in the room has some information that would be helpful to your project if they knew what you were doing.
Sure.
And so then at the end, you see them. They're off on the corner, and they're just kind of exchanging information. It's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay. One last thing.
Yeah.
If people want to know when your next presentation is, if they want to know more about you, if they want to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is my website, which is just my name, Maggie Stuckey, with no punctuation, maggiestuckey.com. At the bottom of every page, there's a little box. I think it's yellow, although we might be changing that color. And it says, send Maggie a message.
Okay.
That dumps into my email, and then I have the other person's email so I can reply back. It's
Gotcha.
very easy loop.
Sounds great to me.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
So one of the reasons I wanted us all to talk about our particular area of interest, Pat, is that sometimes somebody else in the room has some information that relates to what you're writing about. And so I want you guys to have a chance to, hook up. I am a full-time writer of nonfiction books in two vastly different arenas. Under my own name, I write what the industry calls lifestyle books, which includes things like parenting and general health and wellness issues, but primarily cooking and gardening. And those are the two areas that I mostly write in, cooking and gardening. I have 11 of those books. All of them, 2 of them were self-published, although one was later picked up by a company called Globe Pequot back east, which publishes a lot of nature books and travel books, that kind of thing. The other one was self-published way back in the day when that meant finding and hiring a typesetter, finding and hiring an illustrator, getting bids for printing, and then you end up with boxes of books that you got to do something with, right? That's my first book. And I had come from advertising. So I knew a little bit about promotion, and I promoted the bejesus out of that thing. And we sold, our market was Oregon and Washington. It's a book about how to grow houseplants in the Northwest, because we don't have a lot of indoor light. A lot of the month, it's gray. The book was called Green Plants for Gray Days. So the market was just Oregon and Washington, and we sold 10,000 books, which I was so new at this, I didn't know then that that's very good. But that was the beginning. I'm not even going to tell you how many years ago that was. I also work, it's about half of my time, as a ghostwriter. Technically, there's a spectrum of editorial involvement, and the different levels have different names, and sometimes the dividing line from one to another is very, very fuzzy. So I call it ghostwriter because a lot of people have heard that term. Mostly what I do is more accurately described as collaboration, which means me and the nominal author working together from some kind of material. A mess, that's why I'm involved, but ghostwriting usually means you start with nothing. You start with a blank screen, a blank page. I have done close to 100 of those. Some of them have been wildly successful. Huge, huge bestsellers. Some of them just did moderate sales. And those are all on business topics. Not highly technical, but the kind of thing that when you go into a big bookstore and they have these signs up, this is poetry, this is travel, these cookbooks are here. There's a section called business. And those are topics for business people, but written for the general reader, not highly, highly technical. That's the kind of book that I work on, and I've done lots and lots of those. Almost all of those involve a proposal to one degree or another. When I write my own books, obviously I do a proposal. Sometimes with these other books, I'm usually brought into the project when it is already a sure thing. So either an editor or an agent contacts me to see if I'm available to help write this book. So sometimes the proposal step has already been skipped, but usually not. Usually part of what I do is work on the proposal, make it better, or write it from the beginning. So I've been doing this for a long time, about 30 years. So a lot of proposals have passed through my hands. What I wanted to do with this class, and the reason it sort of has come to be a big part of my sort of the lecture half of me, is I am so often encounter people who don't understand this very, very basic thing. So if you don't learn anything else from this class, but this, let it be this. If you're talking about a nonfiction book, and your goal is to have it published traditionally, that is not by one of these self-publishing platforms which seem to multiply every day. Not that way, but you want a traditional publishing event. You don't write the whole book. You don't submit the whole book. You submit a proposal. Raise your hand if you already knew that. Good. Okay. I'm troubled by the number of people who don't have that clearly in mind, and they go through the whole process of writing the whole book and then trying to sell it, and that is a mistake. That is a big waste of your time. I'll explain why later, but this is it. This is the magic bullet of this whole class. The proposal is everything, and it's got to be terrific. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Publishing, like every other industry, has its own vocabulary. I'm going to be using those words because you need to know them. Here's what this class does not address, because I don't know anything about them. Fiction, children's books, poetry, or memoirs. Now, that last one is going to surprise you, because memoirs are nonfiction. But as far as this one issue, the issue of how you submit your work to a publisher, memoir is treated like fiction. That is to say, anybody that's interested wants to see the whole work, not a proposal. Think of it like a novel. And what you do with a novel is you send, your novel's already written, start from that point. You submit a query letter to editors that you have identified through some careful research. And it's maybe one sheet of information about the novel and about you. The idea is for them to say, yes, we'd like to see that. You need to be at the same point with the memoir. So it needs to be all written before you contact them. Same with the proposal. Proposal needs to be ready before you contact these folks. Because your goal there is to get them to say, yes, I'd love to see that proposal. So you need to have it ready. Okay. We're also not going to talk about self-publishing, although I have opinions about that, and I have some online information for you. I just want to give you a big word of warning. There are a lot of people out there who are very happy to take your money and give you very little in exchange for it. We're also not going to talk about finding an editor/publisher or finding an agent if you want to go that route. That's a different topic, and I assume you've already done your research. If not, I do have some of the handouts will give you information about that. What we are going to talk about is how decisions are made, the various steps in the process from your first contact to signing a publishing contract, which serves to put the proposal in context. We're also going to talk about the parts of the proposal. So your proposal is finished. You've made it as good as it can be. And simultaneously, you have developed a hit list, either editors or agents. If you are represented by an agent, your chances of finding a yes from a major publishing house are much higher. If you do not have an agent, it's not the end of the world. There are a lot of smaller publishing houses that do a very fine job that accept unagented, that's the term for it, unagented submissions. You just need to be sure you're identified on one by one. Through all this research, you have developed a list of maybe 6 to 12 very likely editors. And you send to all of them an introductory email. It is now preferred. And in this email, you introduce yourself, you explain what your book is about, a quick paragraph about what you have identified as the market and what your credentials are to write this book. The goal of that first contact is to get this individual editor to say, yes, we'd like to see the proposal. Get your proposal ready before you start this process. Now, I want to give you a little tip that somebody gave me about how to write to people that you don't know. A couple of years ago, I got this email out of the blue from somebody I did not know, and in the subject matter line, it said, Phil Allen sent me. Well, Phil Allen is a friend of mine, and I trust him, so I figured Phil knows this guy. So I read it, and I did what he asked. The point is that got me to read it. So when my Suit Night book was published, do you guys know who Marion Wright Edelman is? Children's Defense Fund. I thought it would be wonderful to have an endorsement from her on the cover because I admire her so much, but I don't know her. But the Edelmans have two sons. One of them lives in Portland. His name is Jonah. I don't know Jonah either. But in the condominium complex where I live, is a woman named Avell Gordley, who is a retired state senator and still a powerful force in the African American community in Portland. So Avell, do you know Jonah? Yes, I do. I need to contact him, and this is why can I use your name? And she said, sure. So I sent a message to Jonah that I wanted to contact his mother, but in the subject matter line, I put Avell Gordley sent me. There's no way in the world he would not look at that. So I said, I want to contact your mother, and this is why, and if you would be willing to give me the best contact information, I'd be very grateful. And so he said, you should write to my mother's longtime assistant, and this is her name, and this is her email. So I wrote to that woman, and in the subject matter line, I put, Jonah Edelman sent me. Obviously, she's going to look at that. And I did get a really wonderful, heartwarming endorsement from Mrs. Edelman. It might have happened anyway, but I'm pretty sure it's because I found a way to make sure they read the email. So if you have any personal connection to this person you're writing to, even if it's 20 degrees of separation, if you know this person has published somebody that you're acquainted with, or you read something about them in a trade magazine, or you heard them speak at a writer's conference, anything like that, that you can sort of entice them to look at the email, that's your first challenge. So that person says, Yes, I'd love to see the proposal. And you sent it. Again, by email. There's absolutely nothing wrong with contacting these people simultaneously, by the way. That used to be kind of not good etiquette. That's no longer the case. And you don't even have to explain that you're submitting it several places. Everybody assumes that to be the case. Once the person receives the proposal, then we all land in this big fog of what the heck are they doing and why on earth is it taking so long? Because it can take a long time to get a response. It's perfectly valid to send a quick follow-up after about 6 weeks if you haven't heard anything. A second follow-up 6 weeks after that. In my personal experience, I've known it to stretch on for several months, but most of the time you will get an either, thank you for the proposal, I reviewed it carefully, it's just not a good fit for us. And that is genuine, and there are reasons. That's kind of a catch-all phrase that encompasses a lot of reasons, but it's not because we think we don't like it. It's just it really doesn't fit with what we're planning to do. The good outcome is when this person says, I'm going to take this to the editorial meeting. That's the next step. Almost all publishing houses have either once a week or once every other week, an editorial meeting at which individual editors who have received a proposal that they like and they've kind of fallen in love with it, they want to make a pitch to the whole, because everybody has to say yes. An individual editor, unless they are at the very top of the ladder, which is called editorial director, doesn't have the authority to assign a book on their own. So everybody needs to buy in. So they're all at this meeting, and so this one person is making a pitch for your book because she's fallen in love with it. A couple of other people have also got things they've fallen in love with they want to make a pitch for. And there's probably not enough money to do them all. Or maybe some of them are even in conflict with each other. That has happened, you know. Can't bring out 2 books on the same subject matter in the same time period. Even getting to the point of taking your proposal to that meeting is a big step. And if that happens, you should pat yourself on the back. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing. That may produce questions. Sometimes that editor has already done some preliminary costing work, maybe have a rough P&L already worked out, maybe have the very beginnings of a marketing program, although your proposal addresses the marketing plans, may have some ideas to present, may even have a rough sketch of a cover. Let me say this because I'll repeat it over and over again. The proposal works best if it gives that person all the ammunition they need to get a yes out of that meeting. Everybody agrees because of what you said in the proposal that this is a publishable book, there's a market for this. This book will be profitable if we publish it. So yes, let's do it. You can't expect them, well, they do have their opinions based on what they see going all around in the industry, but they don't know you yet. So everything about you and your idea and the structure of your book has to be in this proposal. So they have what they need. Now the truth of the matter is, they get hundreds of these things, sometimes thousands a year, and they're just overwhelmed. So, sad to say, some of them approach this proposal looking for a reason to say no, which is just another argument to us that we've got to make it as strong as we can, give them a reason to say yes. And now, often at the editorial meetings, there are representatives from the sales team, representatives from the marketing department, representatives from the promotion people, and it really sort of lives or dies on the impression of the sales force. A lot of publishing houses, even the pretty big ones, use what are called commission representatives, which are separate business people. They cover a certain geographic territory, and they may represent 3 or 4 different publishers. And they go to all the bookstores in their territory, and they show the catalog from this company and the catalog from that company. Way before that happens, sometimes they are involved in giving input to the editorial meeting. And even if they're not involved, their sales manager, who is based there where the publishing house is there in the meeting and will say, we'll never sell that, you might as well not bother. Or, I think we could do really well with that. And I mean, I have to tell you, their word counts for a lot. So sometimes the output of that editorial meeting is another round of questions back to you from this editor. Somebody expressed a concern about the number of illustrations, blah, 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 or the type of illustration you're suggesting, would you be open to something else, kind of thing, that kind of thing. All of those, that's all positive. That means they really are actually intrigued by the idea. And then eventually, if the gods are smiling, you get this email or a phone call that says, we'd like to publish a book, we'd like to offer you a publishing contract. At which point you say, that's just wonderful, let me see it. Because you don't have to sign, you don't have to agree to all those terms. You don't have to. Contract is negotiable all the way around. And sometimes, especially people for whom this might be their first major house publication, they just forget that part. Reviewing those contracts is a completely separate class. But I just want you to know that you don't have to say yes right then. What you should say is, I can't wait to see the contract. Thank you so much. Because elements of the contract are in your control. One of the things they're going to ask you is, when can you deliver the finished product? Because that then becomes an element in the contract. A book of X number of words delivered with delivery and acceptance by a certain date. You're then contractually obligated to that. So you need to have this discussion about these fine points before you produce an actual document that everybody agrees to and everybody signs. Okay? And then, at least 1 year later, you have an actual book in bookstores. But most of the people don't understand why it takes them. Just take my word for it, it does. And there's a lot that you do in between. The reason that editors like to see a proposal as opposed to a finished book is they like the opportunity to have input in the content. Because remember, they may have a perspective on your topic that's wider than what you originally envisioned, which means there's a wider market for your book, which is a good thing. So if you have completely written it, there's not any room for them to get in and make their own suggestions. If you get to that point, I highly recommend take seriously whatever they say. You don't have to do it just because they say so, but you'd be foolish not to consider seriously what they're suggesting, because 99 times out of 100 it's going to be an improvement.
You said that, to go ahead and submit to like 6 to 12 different places
Yeah.
and stuff, so that's okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever gotten like more than one person interested in the works? Or
Yes.
How do you manage that?
How do you manage that? Well, you may have decided which of those is your favorite. You go back to that person and say, there is interest elsewhere. Can you give me a sense of how close you are to making a final decision? There is interest elsewhere. If there really is, don't try to fake that, because that'll come back to bite you. And there is such a thing as an auction where, and it really is exactly what that word implies, publishers actually bid against each other on the opportunity to publish a particular title. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen. So it's quite likely that if you have a good, strong idea and a well-written proposal, and you several people ask to see it, that they'll give you these positive clues all at the same time. And then even if you get an offer, you don't have, remember, you don't have to say yes right away. That's when you go back to your number one choice and say, how are things standing? I've got another offer pending. Well, that's legitimate. We're about ready to jump into the handout, so just let me say, are there any sort of overall questions that are troubling you? No? Here, Jane, you look like you're thinking about something.
Well, not really troubling. I was just thinking when you, for example, you finish a novel, you send in your query letter, they say we're interested. Will they probably ask you for the first 2 or 3 chapters?
No, your proposal includes 2 sample chapters.
Usually the first 2 chapters, or does it?
No, the first one and whichever one you think is the best. Wish to be represented by an agent, and you are currently not. You need to start developing a hit list of agents, just as you would as editors if you want to go directly that route. Does everybody understand how that works?
No.
No. Okay. You sign a contract with a literary agent, which is either open-ended or you sign a contract for just this one project. That person becomes, the phrase is, agent of record. Everything that happens thereafter gets funneled through that person. I'm going to call it a her because often in fact, the industry as a whole is largely dominated by women, all the way up to the very top levels. So she is actually your best friend through this. If you need an extension on the delivery date, which I hope you don't, because that's a sign of less than professional attitude, but things happen. You know, you could get hit by a bus. I hope you don't, but it could happen. If you need an extension, it would be your agent who negotiates that. If you want to go that route, you approach the agent the same way I described you approach this editor. You send the first query, they say, yes, I'd love to see that proposal, and you send them that proposal. So you start from here, and you could go down either one road or the other road, or both. There's no reason you can't do both. Okay? But the steps are the same, no matter which pathway you're on. So the agent will be the one to negotiate the terms of the contract and stand behind you if there's any kind of problems along the way. Weird things happen. It is not at all unknown that the editor who signed this book decides to take a year off and go to Timbuktu, and somebody else ends up with a project who has no idea of the history and needs to be brought up to speed. That's your agent's job to do that. Sometimes they get fired, sometimes they move to a different house. We'll negotiate the contract, and then usually the contracts call for an advance, which is an advance against future royalties, which means that the books sell at a certain a percentage rate, and as soon as enough books at that rate have sold to cover that advance, then you start getting future royalties. If it doesn't earn out, that's the phrase for it, if it doesn't earn out, thank heavens we don't have to pay the money back. But you probably won't get another contract from the same publisher. Then whenever money passes hands, the publisher sends it to the agent of record, who takes her commission, which is 15%, and passes the remainder on to you. And that arrangement lasts until the end of time. If your book turns into a Disney movie and you get offered $1 bajillion, she gets 15% of that. If it's sold to publishers in other languages, actually in other languages it's usually 20% because there are 2 agents involved, 2 on both ends. And they split it 10% and 10%. And so you get a royalty report twice a year. It is 3 months behind real time, so December to June, July, you usually get a royalty report in August or September that covers the first 6 months, and then the same time gap for the second 6 months. So you get a report and a check, or your agent sends you the check with a copy of the report. sales report tells you all kinds of sales and all the different different discounts that the books are sold at. So it makes a real difference whether you're agreed to take a percentage of the net or the gross, but never mind, because it's always going to be net. So that's the thing with agents. Most of them are located in New York, although because of the way the communication works these days, they don't have to be. Many of them are in other parts of the country. They like to be in New York because going to lunch with the editor and agent is an established thing. That's where business gets done a lot of the time. So if you're in the same town, it's easier to do it that way. And you may not ever actually meet that person in person. That's very common, especially for us out here. Never meet them. No? So if you want to talk about how to find an agent, we'll deal with that at the end, because that's really a different class altogether. I want you to embrace the idea that you are the biggest promoter of your book. You guys have these packets that start at number 1. That's what we're going to go through together. The best description, summary about proposals, comes from Amicom Books. Amicom is the book publishing unit of the American Management Association, so all their books are on business topics of publishing houses, and particularly a lot of agents have on their website a page of what we'd like to see in a proposal. Their description goes like this. The proposal is like a business plan for your book. Now remember, these are all business people they're talking to. But think about what goes in a business plan. There's a description of the product, what problems it solves, why the world needs this product, what it would look like, smell like, taste like, who would want to buy it, and where are they, and how do we reach those people. All of that stuff goes into your proposal. But since we're talking about a book and not a new brand of toothpaste, you also need to describe who you are and why you are the one best person to write this book. And that, in a nutshell, is the essence of a proposal. The book, the contents of the book, your credentials, the market, as specific as possible, and a plan to get to them, consisting of advertising, promotion, marketing, all that kind of stuff. Plus, you will include 2 sample chapters, first chapter and 1 others. So this top sheet, your number 1 here, is my own summary of the parts of a proposal. A cover page is nice. I told you to send this by email, but what they're going to do sometimes is print it out and pass it around. So a cover page is just a nice thing. The table of contents of the proposal itself. Okay, so somebody has a capacity to jump forward if they need to, or refer back. The overview. Let me come back to that, because that's number 3 is absolutely everything. Number 4, the market. Who specifically would be a potential buyer? Do not say, please do not say, everybody would love this book, because there's no such thing. I mean, that just tags you as an amateur. Let's be honest, it really does. Competing books. Oh, and then the author is your credentials, your authority to write the book, any educational background you have that ties to the, or any other things you've had published in this area, or any workshops you lead, or podcasts you deliver, any of that kind of stuff. Competing books and how your book compares. Promotion is not only things that you're willing to do if somebody else sets it up for you, but things that you yourself know you can do to help with promotion.
Like an example?
Like an example would be if you have a website and you know how many people visited a week, or you have a Facebook page about you or about your book or about your topic, and you know how many people visit that. Or you are a member of a nonprofit organization or some kind of professional association that's allied to the subject matter, and you know how many members it has, and they have a regular newsletter. So that's 5,700 people who are capturable and who have an immediate interest in the topic, that kind of stuff. The overall package of your visibility, you're going to encounter the word platform a lot. And what that really means is ways that people recognize your name and know how to find you in the world out there. So a combination, you know, you don't need to do Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff, you know. You spend all your time doing that. That's crazy. The recommendation that I was given once, and it makes a lot of sense, is think who your natural target, your natural audience is, and which of those things would they be most likely to gravitate towards, and that's where you want to put your energy. Okay. Chapter by chapter outline, number 8. This is important. This is where you write 1 or 2 paragraphs, no more than half a page, on each chapter. This shows a lot. This shows that you have command of the subject matter, that you've thought it all the way through. You know how you're going to open up the book. You know how you're going to go from chapter 1 to chapter 2, and from chapter 2 to chapter 3, and so on. You've got a plan in mind, and it's not just haphazard. You've actually spent a lot of time developing the architecture of this book. You're going to say in the overview what the essence of the architecture is, and here's where you illustrate it. And an appendix would be, if your topic is suddenly in the news, and there was a New York Times Magazine piece about it a couple of months ago, you would actually not only want to mention that, but actually show that clip, so people can see it's hot, or it's important right now. Now, I want to go back to the overview, number 3. This is where your proposal will fail or succeed, no matter what else you do. I want you to take note of the fact that you don't actually talk about what's in the book and all the way to number 8. That's deliberate. All this other stuff is what they're going to focus on first. The overview, sometimes people ask me, is it kind of like an executive summary in a business document? Only partly, because it is a summary, but an executive summary is usually pretty dry. The overview captures the essence of the book in the most compelling way you can think of. Explains what it is, explains why it's new, explains who you are, explains what it is, why it's new, why it's needed, and why it's you. And in the most imaginative, dramatic, compelling way you can think of. Yeah?
That almost seems like you've already written the book yourself.
When you finish with a proposal, the book is halfway done. Yeah. You have to have it planned out. Absolutely you do. But you don't have to do all the actual writing of the chapters. It's the difference between an expanded outline and a whole chapter. It is not unknown that people write their whole book and then go back and write a proposal as if they hadn't written the book.
That makes sense.
A lot of people do that. I hope you don't, because you don't leave an opportunity for the influence of your ultimate publishing house. And that is the kind of thing that will set you in good stead with them, that you accept their suggestions and you take them seriously and you respect them, and you work well together. That turns out to be a good working team. You can write the whole thing and then pretend you haven't written it. You just write the proposal that reflects it, if you want to do that. Or maybe you already have the book written and you want to write the proposal. That's okay too. But if you have not, if you're just still shaping it in your mind,
I'd like to see you go through all the thinking you need to come up with what you think is the best architecture. I keep using that word because it's more than an outline, it's the actual structure of how the chapters fold together to create this overarching thesis that you want to emphasize. And then you will know this chapter has to cover this topic, and this chapter has to cover this topic, and this chapter has to cover this topic. And this is how they link together. You need to do at this point is demonstrate that you know what you're doing. You know what you're talking about, and you have worked out a plan that you think works. But you're open to other ideas. The proposal is going to be about 40 pages.
40?
Yeah. Because you're going to have 2 sample chapters.
Okay.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
gonna do that?
yeah.
Your 2 sample chapters,
Oh,
and that's what creates the bulk of it, isn't it?
It's about a half to 60%. You're going to talk at length about the market. You're going to talk at length about your promotion ideas. You're going to talk at length about your own credentials. You know, all that stuff counts. Okay, that's page number 1. There is a standard format for proposals. That's why I gave you this. This is pretty much a standard sequence. That's number 5, 4B, 5. This is some pieces of my proposal. A couple of years ago, the big trend in gardening, and hence in gardening books, was kitchen gardens. The year before that, it was container gardening. But no one thought to combine those 2 ideas until now. This is a very good overview. It's immediately clear what the book is about. It's immediately clear that it's a new idea. It's also clear that it's in a recognizable category. It's a gardening book. As you see, the rest of the overview is a little bit about how I came to the idea, who the two authors are. And I have a section in my proposal usually called What's New and Different. It's kind of a place I can pull together things I want to make sure that they don't miss. It may even be repetition for something that's somewhere else, but if all you see is this, you'll get the key points.
I have a question on
Yeah.
your cover sheet. Do you think it's more important to put the email on there or just the street address and phone number?
I would put all your contact information.
do you think that they actually read all of
Yes.
the proposals?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, well, let me. The short answer is yes. The long answer is they read it all if they are intrigued by the overview.
The overview, okay.
That's why I said the overview is the key to everything. And remember what else I said. This is the dirty little secret. They are looking for reasons to say no. Now we're going to switch over to resources. The first step is going to be to start developing a list of likely editors or likely agents. First thing, you need to start familiarizing yourself with who's who and where they are and what they're interested in. A lot of this stuff is online, and I'm giving you stuff that's free online. Number 1, Publishers Weekly, which is the publication for the publishing world. And half of it consists of reviews of books that will be coming out in the near future. All of those kinds of materials that you can find in the library or online are something you need to sort of look at.
Yeah.
Be careful. It's easy to get trapped into spending all your time doing this, but you need to start building an awareness and a familiarity with the trends, what publisher is buying what kind of books, and anything you can, and who's moving from. I told you these guys move around all the time. That's what they do. PW Daily, which is free. It's the other half of the magazine that's not reviews. See the word more circled? If you open up that link, handout number 10. Now, look at the top. See all those tabs at the top? obituaries, book deals, financial reporting, page to screen. You see all of that? Okay, if you click on those, you open up that section of the magazine. Book deals, people, marketing, tip sheet, publisher news, all that stuff is useful to us as we're just trying to learn what's going on in the publishing world. There's another one, similar name, Publisher's Lunch, which has two free newsletters. Publisher's Lunch Daily. This will tell you they maintain an incredible database of all the new deals, people. And this is where you'll read who's retiring, who's moved from one publishing house to another publishing house, who's moved from a publisher to an agent. You need to know that. Publisher's Lunch Weekly, which is just called Lunch Weekly. In this case, they list not only the deal, but they list the author and the acquiring editor by name and the agent by name. So if you see a project here that's kind of similar to yours, here's a good place to pull out an agent's name or an editor's name and start on the list you're building. The same people who do Publisher's Lunch Daily and Publisher's Lunch Weekly have a paid service called Publisher's Marketplace, which costs $25 a month. You can subscribe to it for just 1 month. And what you get then is access to an incredible amount of organization that is, of information that's organized in every way you want to know. You can search for people Caroline, who write books about children's illness. You can search for editors who focus on that. You can focus on agents who represent those kind of books. And it gives you that person's name, phone number, email address, the last 6 books they did, and who they were sold to, and how much, what the advance was.
Target the person.
You absolutely can, for $25 a month. And you can do it just one time, just 1 month. Plus, a couple times a year, they offer like a free preview for over a weekend. Same group of people as we're number 3, Publishing Trends, publish this thing. This is only the first sheet. So if you've come up with the name of an editor or an agent, but you don't know how to reach them, well, this will only work for editors, but this is a full of the email format for that company. A lot of people say that this trend toward consolidation of the publishing houses is just horrible for writers because it gives them much fewer opportunities. That's true, and it's not true. For me, I told you that the company that published my original Tea Party book was acquired by the company that published the Container book, and so now it's all part of one larger conglomerate. Workman has a much bigger footprint in the world than Workman Publishing than storybooks. And one of the things that Workman does is they do this contest once a month to a Twitter. And the winner of the contest gets a book and a thing that goes along with the topic of the book. So all of a sudden, I'm getting all these extra Twitter messages of people wanting to enter the contest. And I didn't know the first thing about it. And so, because Workman decided to feature my Suit Night book, even though it's not a Workman title, it's a story imprint, but it's part of the same family. So they chose my book that month to be the contest feature, which meant that suddenly I have, 600 or 700 extra Twitter followers, which doesn't mean anything to me except it was nice. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that happened is, anybody here watch that shopping channel, QVC? Come on, fess up if you do. Well, there's a show there called In the Kitchen with David. It's the most popular show. They, like everything else, he sells stuff. It's a 3-hour live show twice a week. But out of that 3 hours, they set aside 6 minutes for something they call the cookbook corner. And they invite a cookbook author to come with their book and talk about it and they display, they hire a stylist to cook some recipes and set it up pretty, and he tastes them and blah, blah, blah. So I was invited to be one of the cookbook corner people. In 6 minutes, we sold 3,000 books. Now, there's no way in the world I could do that on my own. Even Story probably could not make that happen, but Workman can make it happen because they're bigger, more established, and they have a bigger presence. They have the better contacts. So that's the reason that works.
Were you present?
Oh, yeah. It was actually, it was cool. It was a very interesting experience. On the other hand, this most recent proposal of mine, the one that I told you that just totally fizzled out, I almost had it sold to an editor at Rodale Books. It's a book about herbs. And then, in the middle of our conversation, which was getting more and more positive through all these various stages that I laid out for you, Rodale was acquired by PRH, Penguin Random House. And this editor now has a different boss who wants her to focus on completely different stuff. So that one just fell flat. So there's both good things and bad things to say about it. The main thing is when they combine this way, they save money. They're instead of 10 different warehouses, they have one big one. And instead of 1 million salespeople on the road, they have a concentrated thing. And instead of 12 different catalogs, they have one. Well, maybe they do have different catalogs because they try to keep their identity editorially separate. But there's a lot of economies of scale, which means that they have more money and therefore they stay in business, which we need them to do. And there's more money for advances, there's more money for promotion, there's more money for editor salaries, all that stuff that matters. Other ways you can learn about what's happening in the publishing world. Predators and Editors is a very valuable website. That one and Writer Beware. Self-publishing has become such a thing in recent years that there's a lot of companies have popped up wanting to help you get your book into print. A lot of them make claims that they can't possibly fulfill and charge you a lot of money for very little benefit. Predators and Editors and Writer Beware will keep you away from those companies because they're updated all the time. And it's well worth your time. AgentQuery.com also kind of gives good information, including who's a member of AAR. It's the professional group of literary agents and the ones that they have this code of conduct and ethics that they are pledged to adhere to. If somebody's not a member of AAR, I would be cautious about them.
Really?
Yeah. Querytracker.net is just a way for you, it's useful if you're sending out a lot of queries. It's a way to keep track of that. WritersDigest.com. Writers Digest is a well-established magazine, and here's the online version of it. Has a column called How I Got My Literary Agent. Search for the following phrase. 2018 key book publishing paths. And it will show you this. It's actually, the original one is in color. I don't have a color printer. Good overview of the publishing world today. The columns are at the big 5. We just looked at that. Mid-size and large, and then small presses. That's under traditional publishing. And then the alternative, which is self-publishing and assisted publishing. These are all the people that will take your money and help publish your book, like Amazon stuff. She explains how they all work, how they're different from each other. It's a good little thumbnail summary. Yeah.
What was that called again?
The 2018 key book publishing paths. And the other one, which is a blog post of hers, called How to Evaluate Small Publishers. And so she goes into more detail about what small publishers means. Chronicle books how a book gets published. It's really very clear. It's complete, but it's very clear and non-technical of all the steps. Also, I want to recommend a friend of mine, Lori Harper, who has a business called Author Biz Consulting. If you follow her on Facebook, you will often see that she forwards posts from all over the publishing world, and every once in a while it'll be something that'll be of interest to you. Go to writers' conferences. They're usually held in the summer. There's a really good one in Portland, sponsored by Willamette Writers. Agents and editors make the rounds of writers' conferences in the summer, specifically looking for new authors. That's why they're there. So if you're pretty much ready, it's worth whatever the fee is for that. Yeah, and usually you can also, for an additional fee, get a 5 or 10 minute conference with a specific one of these people and make your pitch. If you're ready, it's worth it. Also, it's just kind of fun to hang around with writers. If you go into both bookstores and libraries and find books that are like yours, look at the acknowledgments page. Very often, authors will mention by name their editor and their agent. And those are golden. That tells you right away they're already interested in the topic and they know something about it. And if you've got a fresh take on it, they are all ears. Well, Publishers Weekly now has a new sort of sister publication or section called the Book Life Report, which is for self-publishers or independent publishers. There's some articles there. And by the way, when you go to PW Daily, you can also sign up for the Book Life Report. If you're at all interested in self-publishing, you should pay attention to what they have to say. But one of the things they offer is, for a fee, you can get a Publishers Weekly review in the Book Life section, and you can get a picture of your book and a short summary and stuff. I'm not sure I can recommend that you do that, but a lot of people do it, so it must have some value to some people. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for paying attention and following along.
This is excellent. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.